We've been talking about a get that doesn't work. So a woman receives a get that doesn't work and she remarries. And then it turns out after the fact that there was something wrong with the get. Maybe the date was wrong, maybe the place was wrong, maybe the name was wrong. For whatever reason, this get is invalid. And this woman tragically ends up married to two men because the first divorce didn't work and then she remarried. And the Mishnah in Gittin compares this situation to one that we've seen before in Yevamot, where a woman's husband goes abroad, she receives news that he's died, she remarries. It turns out, and then he returns. Then he returns. Same situation. She ends up married to two men. And Mishnah then goes on to articulate one more situation where this could possibly happen. And we've always said the Mishnah is interested in the edge cases and the boundary cases. So now in the seventh Mishnah of the eighth chapter, so it explains how Hakonoset Yivim to, someone who marries his sister-in-law. So he marries his deceased brother's widow. So his brother has died. His brother's actually died childless. So he has an opportunity or an obligation, depending which way you look at it, to marry his brother's wife and to bring up children in the name of his brother. And one of the interesting features of the halacha is that his brother, his deceased brother, might have been married to many, well, to more than one woman. I was going to say many women. I mean, there is a limit. But let's say, for the sake of argument, he's married to two women or three women. The halacha is that as soon as yibum is essentially, or chalitza, by the way, is carried out on one of the, say, the three wives, the other two are free to marry whoever they choose. So the act of yibum or chalitza, the act of either levirate marriage or chalitza, or rejection of a levirate marriage, as soon as one of these women carries it out, the other wives are all completely free. It's as if they had been divorced. Until that moment, they can't marry another man, but once the act of yibum or chalitza takes place, the act of levirate marriage or refusal of levirate marriage takes place on one of the wives, the others are completely free. They can marry whomever they choose. And the Mishnah is going to explore this point. So Hakoneset Yevim Tor, someone married his sister-in-law, his deceased brother's wife, and the other wife that was married to his deceased brother goes off and marries another man. In the Mishnah, the other wife is always called a tzara, an enemy. Clearly, there's an assumption that these two wives might not get on because she's called a tzara. Anyway, the other wife goes on and gets married to another person, and she has a perfect right to do so. But here's the but. Nimtzeit zo shehi elonit. The first one. The first one is found to be an elonit, someone who is congenitally incapable of bearing children. This is not someone who's infertile. Maybe her egg production is not great. This is someone who's congenitally unable to bear children. Maybe she doesn't have a womb, for example. It's possible. And one of the what we've learned already in the Mishnah of Ketubot, that a marriage to an Elonit and marriage to someone who's congenitally unable to produce children doesn't work halachically. It's not considered a marriage. There's an underlying assumption that marriage is for procreation. So the marriage to an Elonit is considered not to be a marriage. And this might, by the way, be more common in situations of a levirate marriage than in others, because of course we've just learned that the husband died childless. So they had no children. So maybe the situation of Elonit is more common. Anyway, in this situation, the woman who's carried out Yibum is an Elonit. So that marriage doesn't work. And it means that her rival wives, the other rival wives, are not free. They're not free to remarry. And if they have remarried, the Mishnah goes on to explain, she must leave both husbands. V'chol hadrachim ha'elu ba. And all these other consequences apply to her. So this tragic situation about being married twice apply equally in this situation. And then let's carry on. Let's just work out some other possibilities in which this could occur. So let's say, for example, the get is correctly written. Going into the eighth Mishnah, let's say the get is correctly written, but it's not delivered correctly. So a scribe writes a get for the husband. He writes it perfectly correctly. He should actually give the get to the husband so the husband can give it to the wife. And if there's any money involved, if the ketubah is involved, he should write the receipt and give it to the wife. And then when the wife gets her money, she can give the husband the receipt. And when the husband gets the get, he can give it to his wife. In other words, the husband gives the get, the wife gives the receipt. But the Sofer did this perfectly properly, but he gave the husband, he gave the get to the wife and the receipt to the husband. What happened? They exchanged them. I presume in this situation, neither party could read correctly. So they both got a document and they exchanged them. But the wife is now giving the husband the get, and the husband is now giving the wife the receipt. So while documents are exchanging, it's a meaningless transaction. It's a meaningless transaction for the wife to give the husband the get, and vice versa with the receipt. So what happened? So some time passes, and then the get, in the words of the Mishnah, the get sort of comes out of the hand of the man. Suddenly it becomes apparent what's happened. The hashovar miyad ha'isha, and the receipt from the hand of the wife. So maybe someone inspects the documents or someone looks at the documents. Anyway, it becomes apparent what has happened. And meanwhile, I mean, the assumption of the Mishnah, by the way, is that meanwhile she's remarried. So she thought she had a kosher get. She's gone and remarried. And there was a kosher get, but she didn't receive it correctly. There was a kosher get, but she didn't receive it correctly. So she's also in this tragic situation. She has to leave both husbands. And all of these consequences apply to her. And the questions that we asked yesterday, how come these consequences apply to the woman and not to the man? Because they've made an equal error in this case. There are two men who've made an equal error in this case. One in not handing over the get correctly, the other in marrying someone who's divorced without checking carefully the paperwork. There are two men who made errors in this case, but the only one who's affected is the woman. So we've seen this situation before, and it's tragic for the woman concerned. And we can't help thinking that, the Dayanim and the authors of the Mishnah are male. We can't help thinking that if the halakha had been written by women, then maybe it would have worked out in a slightly different way. Now, Rabbi Elazar is going to somewhat modulate this halakha. Rabbi Elazar Omer, im al atar zman yatsa, im al atar zman yatsa ein zeget. Im la'achar zman yatsa harei zeget. Rabbi Elazar says, if it immediately comes out, it's not a get. So they immediately discover the error, it's not a get. And I think the assumption behind Rabbi Elazar, by the way, is that when they discover the error immediately, they can correct it. So that is still a correctable problem. So he says it's not a get, but it's a correctable problem. It's a correctable problem. If it only comes out after some time, harei ze get. If it comes out after some time, it is a get. Shelo hakol min harishon la'abed zchut shel sheni. Because the 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 first person, i.e., the man who made this mistake in delivering the wrong get, doesn't have complete power to void the rights of the second man who actually married this woman. So Rabbi Elazar actually will modulate this halacha and will uphold the second marriage, which is, anyway, that's a significant point. That's significant. The Mishnah then continues, Katav legaresh et ishto v'nimlach. What if someone actually wrote a get to divorce his wife and changed his mind? So he starts the process. Really interesting. So almost the opposite of the first situation. He hasn't even delivered the get yet. But interestingly enough, Beit Shammai omrim pasla min hakuna. Beit Shammai says she can no longer marry someone from the priesthood. Well, how could she anyway? Well, let's say for the sake of argument, he changed his mind and then he died. So she'd be an ordinary widow. Well, an ordinary widow can marry a priest. We have it in Vayikra. As far as the priests are concerned, they don't take a wife that's a harlot or that's profaned, but they don't take a wife that's harlot or profaned, and they don't take someone who's divorced. They don't take a woman who's divorced. The widow is not in this list. So if she dies as an ordinary widow, she can marry a priest. Beit Shammai are saying that this person who took a decision to write a get but made a decision not to give it to her has already disqualified her from the priesthood. And we'll see at the end of the tractate that as far as Beit Shammai are concerned, the only possible reason for divorce is adultery in the view of Beit Shammai. For other reasons, we don't do divorce. We really don't do divorce in the words of Beit Shammai. So maybe this halacha from Beit Shammai that she's disqualified from marrying a priest is connected to a feeling that if he's already written the get, he must have some evidence of impropriety, and that might disqualify her from marrying a priest because the rule is isha zona v'chalala, someone who's promiscuous or who's defiled cannot marry a priest. And the halacha doesn't go according to Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel omrim, Beit Hillel say afal pi shenatno la al t'nai, even if he gave her a get with a conditional get. So maybe he gave her a conditional retroactive get that would take effect if he maybe didn't come back from a long journey. We've seen these before. Even that kind of get, which operates retroactively, velo nasat nai, if the condition wasn't fulfilled, lo psala min hakuna, he hasn't disqualified her from marrying a priest. So, in other words, as far as Beit Hillel is concerned, she's absolutely qualified to marry a priest until she actually receives a proper working get and with all the conditions fulfilled.